places in history that do not need ghosts to feel haunted. No ruined castle, no cursed tomb, no abandoned prison. Just an open field, a wide, silent stretch of land where the wind moves through the grass. Birds pass overhead, and nothing seems unusual. But more than 2,000 years ago, on a field in southern Italy, one of the most powerful armies in the ancient world walked into a trap. They did not know it at first. They believed they were marching toward victory. They believed their numbers would crush the enemy. They believed Rome could not be humiliated again. But waiting for them was Hannibal Barca, a man Rome had already learned to fear. And on that day, near a place called Cannae, Hannibal did not simply defeat the Romans, he swallowed them. By the time the Roman soldiers understood what was happening, there was no way out. The front ranks could not move forward. The rear ranks could not move back. The men in the center were crushed together so tightly that many could barely raise their weapons. Dust filled the air. Commands disappeared in the noise. The sun burned above them, and all around them, the trap closed. This was not just a battle. It was a military nightmare, a place where tens of thousands of men realized almost at the same moment that they had not come to fight. They had come to die. This is the story of Cannae, Rome's deadliest day, the battlefield where an empire walked into one of the most terrifying traps in history. Long before Cannae became a name studied by generals, it was just another place in Italy. Fields, dusty roads, open ground, a landscape made for marching armies. But in 216 BCE, Rome was not thinking about the land itself. Rome was thinking about revenge. For years, one man had been moving through Italy like a storm: Hannibal. He was not Roman, he was Carthaginian. Carthage was Rome's great rival, a powerful city in North Africa, across the sea from Italy. The two powers had already fought before, and Rome had won the First Punic War. But victory did not bring peace, it brought hatred. And in the heart of that hatred was the Barca family. Hannibal's father, Hamilcar Barca, had fought Rome and never forgot the humiliation of defeat. According to tradition, when Hannibal was still a boy, his father made him swear that he would never be a friend of Rome. Whether the scene happened exactly as later writers described it or not, the meaning of the story is clear. Hannibal was raised with Rome as his enemy, not as a distant rival, not as a political problem, as a life mission. When he grew older, Hannibal became one of the most brilliant commanders the ancient world had ever seen. He did not think like ordinary generals. He understood movement, timing, terrain, fear, human pride, and more than anything, he understood how to make an enemy destroy itself. Rome had strength, Rome had discipline, Rome had numbers, but Hannibal had patience. And patience can be terrifying in the hands of a genius. The war that led to Cannae began far from Rome itself. Hannibal was in Spain, where Carthage had built power after losing Sicily. Rome and Carthage were watching each other carefully, each waiting for the other to make a move that could justify war. Then Hannibal attacked the city of Saguntum, which was allied with Rome. Rome demanded justice. Carthage refused to surrender him. The Second Punic War began. The Romans expected the war to happen in familiar ways: ships, armies, controlled campaigns. But Hannibal did something no one expected. He did not wait for Rome to come to him. He marched toward Italy, not by sea, by land, across mountains, across hostile territory, across the Alps. With soldiers, horses, and war elephants. To the Romans, it must have sounded impossible. An army crossing the Alps was not just difficult, it was almost insane. The mountains were freezing, steep and deadly. Men slipped from paths, animals collapsed, snow blinded the march. Local tribes attacked. Every mile cost lives. But Hannibal kept going. And when he finally descended into Italy, he had already become more than a commander. He had become a legend. Rome was not facing just another enemy army. Rome was facing a man who had done the impossible before the real war in Italy had even begun. At first, the Romans tried to stop him in the usual way. They sent armies. They trusted Roman discipline. They trusted Roman courage. They trusted the legions, the machine that had carried Rome to power. But Hannibal did not fight them the way they expected. At Trebia, he used cold, exhaustion, and hidden troops to crush a Roman force. At Lake Trasimene, he trapped another Roman army in one of history's great ambushes. Thousands died near the water. The road to Rome itself seemed open. Panic spread. For the first time, many Romans began to understand that Hannibal was different. He was not simply brave. He was not simply lucky. He was reading them. Their habits, their pride, their assumptions. He knew that Roman commanders wanted direct battle. He knew they wanted honor, decision, and speed. He knew they hated the idea of avoiding him, and he used that hunger against them. After the disaster at Lake Trasimene, Rome appointed a dictator named Fabius Maximus. Fabius understood something others did not. Hannibal was too dangerous to face carelessly, so Fabius avoided direct battle. He followed Hannibal, harassed him, cut off supplies when possible, but he refused to give Hannibal the grand clash he wanted. This strategy was frustrating. It felt slow. It felt cowardly to many Romans. They called him names. They mocked his caution. They wanted a decisive victory, not delay. But Fabius may have been the one Roman leader who truly understood the danger. He knew Hannibal was most powerful when Rome gave him the battle he wanted. But Rome was not a patient city. It was proud, aggressive, hungry for revenge. And after months of avoiding battle, many Romans could not stand it anymore. They wanted the war ended. They wanted Hannibal crushed. They wanted proof that Rome was still Rome. So Rome gathered one of the largest armies it had ever placed in the field. The exact number is debated, but ancient sources describe a massive force. Dozens of thousands of Roman and allied soldiers. Enough men, Rome believed, to overwhelm Hannibal by sheer weight. This was not just another army, it was a statement. Rome was saying, "We have lost before, but now we come with everything." Two consuls commanded the Roman force, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro. They were very different men, at least in the way later tradition remembers them. Paulus is often shown as cautious, Varro as aggressive. Whether that contrast is perfectly fair or shaped by later Roman blame, one thing is clear. The Roman army at Cannae was built for a direct attack. They wanted to smash Hannibal's center, break his line, end the war. And on the morning of the battle, they thought they finally had the chance. Hannibal had chosen his ground carefully. That was the first Roman mistake. They believed they were choosing battle, but Hannibal had already chosen the shape of their destruction. The field near Cannae was open enough for a large army. The Romans saw that as an advantage. Their infantry was dense, powerful, and confident. If they could push straight through Hannibal's line, the battle would be over. They had more infantry, they had the weight, they had the momentum. But Hannibal was not planning to resist them in the normal way. He was planning to invite them in. His army was smaller. It was also more diverse. Carthaginians, Libyans, Iberians, Gauls, Numidian cavalry. Men from different lands, with different weapons, different languages, different ways of fighting. To Roman eyes, such an army may have looked less solid than the legions, less uniform, less predictable. But Hannibal turned that variety into strength. He placed his weakest-looking troops in the center. The Gauls and Iberians stood forward in a curved formation, almost like a bulge pointing toward the Romans. On the flanks, he placed his more reliable African infantry. His cavalry waited on the wings. This formation looked vulnerable. That was the point. The Romans would see the center. They would attack it. They would drive it backward. They would believe they were winning. And every step forward would take them deeper into the trap. This is what makes Cannae so frightening. The disaster did not begin when the Romans realized they were surrounded. It began when they thought they were succeeding. The Roman army advanced, thousands of men moving together, shields locked, standards raised, officers shouting orders, dust rising beneath their sandals. In front of them, Hannibal's center began to give ground. Slowly, carefully, not collapsing, not running, bending. The Romans pressed harder. They had been trained for this. Push, break, crush. A Roman infantry attack was not supposed to be elegant. It was force, discipline, pressure. The men behind pushed the men in front. The front ranks drove forward into the enemy line. The entire formation became a human engine. And at first, that engine seemed to be working. Hannibal's center moved backward. The Roman soldiers must have felt the thrill of victory. After years of humiliation, finally the enemy was giving way. Finally, Hannibal was being forced back. Finally, Rome's strength was proving itself. But Hannibal was watching. The more the Romans advanced, the more their own formation changed. Their army became crowded, compressed, pulled inward toward the center. The front ranks followed the retreating enemy. The rear ranks pushed forward behind them. Men from the sides drifted inward, drawn by the belief that the decisive breakthrough was happening in the middle. The Roman army was still attacking, but it was losing shape. And in battle, shape is life. A disciplined army is not just a mass of brave men, it is space, order, lines, communication, the ability to move where needed, the ability to breathe. At Cannae, that began to disappear. The Romans had more men, but too many men in the wrong space can become a weakness. The very size of the army began to work against itself. The soldiers in the center were packed tighter and tighter. The dust made it hard to see. The noise made it hard to hear. The pressure made it hard to fight. Still, they pushed, because from where they stood, it looked like victory was just ahead. That is the cruelty of a perfect trap. It gives hope right until the moment hope becomes impossible. While the Roman infantry drove forward, the battle on the wings was changing. Hannibal's cavalry was stronger. On one side, his heavy cavalry struck the Roman horsemen and defeated them. Then, instead of chasing endlessly, they turned back toward the battlefield. This mattered more than the Romans in the center could know. Cavalry is dangerous not only because it can attack. It is dangerous because it can appear where you thought you were safe. Behind you, on your flank, in the place your mind refuses to check while you are focused on the enemy in front. Soon, Hannibal's horsemen struck the Roman rear. At the same time, the African infantry on Hannibal's flanks began to turn inward. The trap that had been invisible was now becoming real. The Roman center had pushed too far. The Carthaginian line, once curved outward, had bent inward. The Romans were now inside the shape Hannibal had created. Then, the sides closed. Imagine being a Roman soldier in that moment. You are deep in the formation. You cannot see the whole battlefield. You only know what is happening around you. At first, you hear that the enemy is falling back. You feel the push forward. You believe the line is breaking. Then something changes. The pressure from ahead does not disappear. The men beside you stop moving freely. The noise behind you grows louder. Someone says the cavalry has come around. Someone else says the flanks are gone. But there is no room to turn, no room to run, no room to understand. The army around you, the army that made you feel safe, is now a wall. You are protected by men on every side and trapped by them. This is the horror of Cannae. It was not only that Romans died, it was how the battle turned their greatest strength into their prison. Their discipline kept them packed together. Their courage kept them pushing forward. Their numbers made it harder to escape. Their confidence brought them deeper into the center. Everything Rome trusted became part of the disaster. By the time the trap fully closed, the Roman army was surrounded. Front, sides, rear. The soldiers in the outer ranks were under attack from multiple directions. The men in the middle could do almost nothing. Many could not even reach the enemy. They were trapped behind their own comrades, hearing the battle, feeling the pressure, waiting for death to reach them. In ancient battle, panic could spread like fire. But at Cannae, panic had nowhere to go. A panicked man usually runs. Here, there was no space. A frightened man usually turns away. Here, there was no direction that led out. The battlefield became a crush of bodies, shields, weapons, horses, dust, heat, and terror. The Romans were not defeated in a single dramatic moment. They were reduced, layer by layer, rank by rank, hour by hour. This is one reason the battle became so infamous. It was not a quick rout where an army broke and fled. It was containment. The Romans were held in place and destroyed. The killing went on because escape was nearly impossible. Ancient sources give different numbers for the dead, but they agree on the scale of the catastrophe. Tens of thousands of Roman and Allied soldiers were killed. Some accounts suggest around 50,000. Others give even higher figures. Whatever the exact number, the result was clear. Rome had lost not just a battle, it had lost a generation of fighting men. Among the dead was one of the consuls, Paulus. Many senators, nobles, officers, and experienced soldiers also died. This was not a distant frontier loss. This cut into the heart of Roman society. Families across Italy would feel it. Homes would wait for men who never returned. The city of Rome would hear the news and understand that the army sent to save them had been destroyed. The aftermath must have felt unreal. Before Cannae, Rome had suffered defeats. After Cannae, Rome faced something worse, the possibility that it might actually lose the war. Hannibal had won one of the most complete battlefield victories in history. He had defeated a much larger army. He had humiliated Rome on Italian soil. He had shown that Roman power could be broken. And yet, he did not march directly into Rome and end the war. That question has followed the story for centuries. Why did Hannibal not attack the city itself? There are many possible answers. His army had won a tremendous victory, but it was not a siege machine built to take a heavily defended city. Rome's walls were strong. Its people were desperate. Hannibal's troops were tired. His supply situation was complicated. And perhaps most importantly, Rome was wounded but not dead. That may be the most important part of the story. Cannae was a nightmare, but it was not the end of Rome. After the battle, some expected Rome to collapse. Many of its allies in southern Italy began to reconsider their loyalty. Some joined Hannibal, others hesitated. The entire balance of the war shifted, but Rome did something almost impossible. It refused to surrender. No peace, no negotiation, no admission that Hannibal had broken them. Instead, Rome absorbed the disaster. It mourned, it panicked, it changed strategy, and it kept fighting. That is why the story of Cannae is not only about Hannibal's genius, it is also about Rome's terrifying endurance. Most states might have been destroyed by a loss like that. Rome became harder, colder, more determined. The Romans returned to caution. They avoided giving Hannibal another Cannae. They rebuilt forces. They fought elsewhere. They attacked Carthaginian interests in Spain. They stretched the war beyond Hannibal's control. Years later, a Roman commander named Scipio would carry the war into North Africa. Hannibal would be recalled to defend Carthage, and at Zama, he would finally be defeated. Rome would win the Second Punic War. Carthage would survive for a time, but never as Rome's equal. In the long arc of history, Rome triumphed. But Cannae never disappeared, because even victorious civilizations remember the day they almost died. For Rome, Cannae became a wound, a lesson, a warning, a name that meant disaster caused by pride. The Romans had walked onto that field believing numbers would solve the problem. They believed force could replace caution. They believed Hannibal would eventually fight like a normal enemy. They were wrong, and the price was paid in one afternoon of dust and screams. What makes Cannae so disturbing is that the trap was not supernatural. No storm buried the army, no earthquake opened the ground, no plague swept through the camp. It was human intelligence. A man looked at another army and understood exactly how it would behave. He predicted its confidence, its aggression, its hunger for revenge. Then he arranged the battlefield so those instincts would lead it to destruction. That is colder than chaos. Chaos is blind. Cannae was designed. The field became a machine. The Romans supplied the force, Hannibal supplied the shape. And when the two came together, the result was one of the most devastating days in military history. People often imagine ancient battles as wild, simple clashes, two sides running at each other until one breaks. But Cannae proves that ancient warfare could be psychologically complex. Hannibal was not merely stronger. He was not merely braver. He was thinking several moves ahead. He made the Romans feel the battle was going their way. He let their success pull them deeper. He used retreat without collapsing. He used weakness as bait. He used cavalry not as decoration, but as the lock on the trap. And when the moment came, he closed every exit. That is why commanders have studied Cannae for centuries, not because they admire death, but because they fear the possibility of being outthought so completely. The dream of every general is to win decisively. The nightmare of every general is to become Vero at Cannae, to have more men, more confidence, a stronger reputation, and still lead an army into destruction. Cannae is the kind of battle that makes people question what strength really means. Is strength the size of an army, the courage of soldiers, the confidence of a state, the discipline of a formation? All of those things matter, but at Cannae, they were not enough. Strength without understanding became a burden. Courage without awareness became a path into the trap. Discipline without flexibility became confinement. Confidence without humility became death. That is why the battlefield feels haunted even now.
not just because so many people died there, but because the mistakes are still recognizable. Leaders still confuse size with safety. Armies still mistake motion for progress.
People still walk deeper into danger because the first steps feel successful. Kene is ancient, but the pattern is timeless. A powerful force meets a smaller opponent and assumes the outcome is obvious. The smaller opponent cannot win directly, so it changes the game. The stronger side pushes forward, certain it is winning. Then the shape of the fight changes, the exits vanish, and suddenly strength becomes weight. That is the dark lesson of Hannibal's victory. He did not need Rome to be weak. He needed Rome to be predictable. And on that day, Rome was predictable. The soldiers at Cannae did not die because they lacked bravery. They died because bravery was aimed in the wrong direction. The tragedy is that many of them probably fought with discipline until the end. They had trained for years. They trusted their officers. They trusted the man next to them. They trusted the idea of Rome. Then the formation around them became too crowded. The enemy appeared where the enemy was not supposed to be. The rear was no longer safe. The flanks were no longer secure. The front no longer led to victory, and the center became a grave. Think about the silence after the battle. The dust settling, the banners fallen, the sun lowering over the field, weapons lying in the dirt, broken shields, empty helmets. Thousands of men who had marched there that morning believing they were part of Rome's answer to Hannibal. By evening, they were the warning. Hannibal's men had won a victory so complete that even his enemies could not deny his brilliance. But victory at that scale creates a strange kind of silence. There is no cheering loud enough to erase what the field has become. No strategy clean enough to make the ground feel ordinary again. For the Carthaginians, Cannae was glory. For the Romans, it was trauma. For history, it became one of the clearest examples of genius and horror standing in the same place. Because that is the uncomfortable truth. Hannibal's plan was brilliant, and the result was horrifying. Those two facts do not cancel each other. They sit together. That is why military history can feel so dark. The same mind that creates a masterpiece of strategy may also create a field of thousands of dead men. Cannae is admired as a tactical achievement, but for the men trapped inside it, it was not a lesson. It was the end of the world. The Roman soldier in the center did not see a double envelopment. He did not see a famous maneuver. He saw dust, shields, panic. The faces of men pressed too close. He heard orders that no longer made sense. He felt the impossible pressure of an army collapsing inward. History gives names to patterns, but people live through moments. And the moment at Cannae must have felt endless. What makes the story even more powerful is that Hannibal had already shown Rome what he could do. He had beaten them before. He had ambushed them before. He had humiliated commanders before. And still, Rome came at him in exactly the way he needed. This is not because the Romans were stupid. They were not. Rome built one of the most successful military systems in history. But successful systems can create dangerous habits. When a method has worked for generations, people begin to believe it is natural law. Rome believed in the weight of the legion. Hannibal believed in making that weight fall into the wrong place. At Cannae, Hannibal did not break Rome's system by being stronger than it. He bent it. He redirected it. He let it move with all its force until it could not turn. That is the genius, and that is the horror. After Cannae, Rome changed the way it fought Hannibal. It learned, painfully, that not every enemy should be given a direct battle. It returned to delay, pressure, and strategic patience. It denied Hannibal the kind of battlefield where he was most dangerous. This was not glamorous. It did not satisfy the desire for immediate revenge. But it worked. Rome survived because it eventually learned what Cannae had taught in the cruelest possible way. Do not fight the enemy's perfect battle. Do not confuse courage with wisdom. Do not let pride choose the field. The Roman Republic would continue to grow after the war. In time, Rome would dominate the Mediterranean. Carthage would eventually be destroyed in a later war. Hannibal would spend the rest of his life as a hunted man, admired and feared, but never again able to achieve what he had achieved in Italy. Yet his name remained, because Cannae remained. Even Rome's final victory could not erase the fact that for one day, Hannibal had made Rome look helpless. Not weak, helpless. That is different. A weak army is defeated because it lacks strength. A helpless army still has strength, but cannot use it. That was the Roman army at Cannae. Tens of thousands of trained men, weapons in hand, courage in their bodies, and no space to turn that courage into survival. The battlefield had been arranged against them so completely that their strength became trapped inside itself. That is why Cannae feels like more than a battle. It feels like a warning about control. The Romans lost control of the field. Then they lost control of their formation. Then they lost control of communication. Then they lost control of movement. And finally, they lost control of their fate, one layer at a time. That is how disasters often happen, not all at once, slowly enough that the people inside them can still believe there is time to fix it, until suddenly there is not. At the beginning of the battle, the Romans could still choose: advance or wait, spread out or compress, respect the enemy or underestimate him. But every choice narrowed the next one. By the middle of the battle, choices were disappearing. By the end, the men in the center had none. That progression is what makes Cannae so chilling. It is the story of an army losing freedom step by step, while believing it is moving toward victory. The name Cannae has survived for over 2,000 years because it represents the perfect trap. But behind the word are human beings. Farmers called into service, allied soldiers marching under Roman command, young men trying to prove courage, veterans who had survived earlier campaigns, officers carrying family honor, men who had eaten breakfast that morning without knowing the field would become their grave. Ancient history often turns people into numbers. 50,000 dead, 70,000 dead, 10,000 captured, 6,000 escaped. But numbers can make horror feel distant. Each number was a life, a body in armor, a voice, a fear, a family waiting somewhere. The scale matters because it shows the size of the catastrophe, but the truth of the catastrophe lives in the individual moment. A soldier realizing the men behind him are pushing forward, but the enemy is now on the sides. A commander realizing his orders cannot reach anyone. A wounded horse screaming in the dust. A standard bearer trying to keep the symbol of his unit above the chaos. A man looking up and seeing only smoke, sun, and helmets. This is the part of history that does not fit cleanly into maps. Maps show arrows, lines, movements, encirclement. But no arrow on a map can show what it felt like to be inside the circle. No diagram can capture the moment when an army understands that the battle is no longer a battle. It is a cage. That cage was Hannibal's masterpiece, and Rome never forgot it. For centuries, Cannae became the dream of commanders who wanted decisive victory. Surround the enemy, destroy their ability to move, strike from all sides, end the battle completely. But the word also became a warning, because every dream of creating a Cannae carries the fear of suffering one. There is perhaps no greater terror for an army than being surrounded with no way out. Retreat is part of war. Defeat is part of war. Even panic can become survival if there is somewhere to run. But at Cannae, the Romans were denied even that. This is why the field belongs among the most haunting places in military history. Not because of ruins, not because of legends about curses, because of geometry. The shape of the battlefield killed them. Hannibal turned open space into a closed room. He turned movement into confinement. He turned Roman aggression into the mechanism of Roman destruction. And once the trap closed, the outcome became almost mechanical. That is what makes it so cold. So many ancient battles were messy, uncertain, decided by morale, luck, weather, or sudden collapse. Cannae had all the chaos of battle, but beneath it was design, a terrible order hidden inside the dust. The Romans thought they were breaking Hannibal's center. Instead, they were entering the mouth of the trap. They thought the enemy was giving way. Instead, he was making room for them to die. They thought their numbers made them unstoppable. Instead, their numbers made escape impossible. That reversal is why the story still works after 2,000 years. It is almost like a tragedy. The hero's greatest quality becomes the cause of his fall. Rome's courage becomes recklessness. Rome's mass becomes compression. Rome's hunger for victory becomes blindness. And Hannibal, standing against a larger force, sees it all. In the end, Cannae did not destroy Rome. That may be the most astonishing part. A lesser power might have surrendered. A less stubborn state might have broken apart. Rome did not. It absorbed one of the worst military disasters imaginable and continued. That does not make the disaster smaller. It makes Rome's survival more extraordinary. But survival does not erase the dead. A state can recover. Families cannot recover the men who never returned. A republic can raise new armies. A mother cannot raise the same son twice. That is the human cost hidden behind the grand story of Rome and Carthage. Empires survive by turning loss into policy. People experience loss as absence. After Cannae, Rome made decisions, changed strategy, raised more troops, punished panic, rewarded endurance, continued the war. But across Italy, there would have been empty places at tables, fields without sons, homes without fathers, names spoken in grief. That is the other battlefield, the one that exists after the armies leave. Cannae was fought in a day. Its shadow lasted for generations. And even now, when people speak of Hannibal, they often speak of that one field. Not because it was his only victory, but because it was the clearest expression of his genius. A smaller army, a larger enemy, a dangerous situation, and a plan so precise that it turned Roman confidence into catastrophe. For Americans watching this story today, Cannae may feel distant at first. Ancient Italy, Carthage, Roman consuls, armies with shields and spears. But the fear at the center of it is not distant. it is very human. The fear of realizing too late that you misread the situation. The fear of discovering that the path forward was chosen by your enemy. The fear of being surrounded by consequences you helped create. That is why Cannae still matters. It is not only a military lesson, it is a human one. The Romans believed they were solving a problem with force. Hannibal understood that force without perception could be guided. He did not stop the Roman hammer by meeting it head-on. He moved the anvil. He let the hammer fall where he wanted. And when it fell, Rome's army shattered. If you stand on a quiet field today, it is hard to imagine the noise, the heat, the dust, the pressure of thousands of men packed together. The moment when confidence turned into dread. The moment when the sun disappeared behind the haze. The moment when the Roman soldiers near the center began to understand that no one was coming to open the circle. History often remembers the commanders, Hannibal, Varro, Paulus, but the field remembers everyone. The men who marched, the men who shouted, the men who fell, the men who survived and carried the memory back to Rome. Those survivors may have been the most haunted of all. To survive Cannae was not simply to escape a battlefield. It was to carry a vision of Rome's destruction inside your mind. How do you describe that to people who were not there? How do you explain that an army so large could vanish? How do you tell a city that its sons were not defeated in honorable lines, but trapped in a human cage? Maybe that is why Cannae became legend. Some events are too large to remain ordinary facts. They become symbols because people need a single word to hold the horror. Cannae, one word for dust, pride, genius, panic, and mass death. One word for Rome's deadliest day. One word for the battlefield where victory became a trap. The strange thing about history is that places can look innocent after enough time passes. Grass grows, rain falls, roads change, cities rise elsewhere. The earth covers what people cannot bear to remember. But the past does not fully disappear. It waits in names. And Cannae is one of those names. A reminder that the most terrifying places are not always built by nature, not always made by volcanoes, earthquakes, or floods. Sometimes the most terrifying place is created by a human mind. A commander sees a field. He sees an enemy. He sees pride. He sees movement before it happens. Then he creates a shape, and thousands die inside it. That was Cannae, not just a battlefield, a trap large enough to hold an army, a grave made from strategy. A place where Rome learned that courage can still lose, strength can still be captured, and confidence can walk straight into death. Hannibal won the day. Rome survived the war. But the field kept the memory, and more than 2,000 years later, the story still feels terrifying for one reason. Because the Romans did not know they were doomed when the battle began. They believed they were winning, until the circle closed.